that, again, I like to invite Harsh once again, who is the Sales Director with 𝗦𝗰𝗹𝗲, India and South Asia. We heard his opening remarks. Let's hear now the solution for the industry from Harsh. All to you, Harsh, for your presentation, please.
Once again, a very interesting presentation from Rahul. I think he touched upon most of the topics, right, starting from your strategic sourcing, contracting, and I think I have to congratulate Rahul. I think they have a very matured implementation of technology, because some of the areas he talked about, saving tracking and your digital workflows to take those approvals from finance, and he touched upon sustainability. And I think the way he ended his presentation, and I'm a sales guy, I'm answering these questions every time during my sales meeting. So I think maybe these are the good points, and maybe during coffee breaks and all that, maybe happy to discuss, because I'm sure when you people are building up a business case for procurement technologies, you would be asked those kind of questions, and there's no one size fit all, because from my experience, I have seen organizations who have gone for like best of breed versus maybe kind of a single unified solution. So it depends from organization to organization, and happy to discuss on that. So with this, I think what I'm going to talk in next couple of minutes, more on your supply chain resilience and your sustainability. So if you look at, these are the two buzzwords, I think, part of every boardroom discussions nowadays. Before we get started, let me give an anecdote. And I was reading an article in Economic Times maybe a month back, and so there, from an executive of a large conglomerate in India, he coined the new term called 5C. And so what 5C means, and he mentioned like entire world is struggling with 5C, and which is your COVID, about commodity, conflict, your container, and I think fifth one, I'm turning 50. Let me refer my note for that, chips, right? So I think very, very interesting, and so maybe we are seeing one disruption after another. And as I talked in my opening remarks, we thought everything settled after the third wave of COVID, and then Russian-Ukraine war started. We thought we'll settle down, but still going on. So disruption is a new norm. So we'll discuss in terms of maybe what could be your different resilience strategies and all that you can put in place to be more proactive. So if you look at, I have put, kind of some of the challenges being faced by different organizations. So already we talked, I think, about your inflation, your geopolitical tensions. We talked about your, the risk from your geopolitical tensions, or let's say from pandemic. Respect to your each industry is getting challenged today. So let me take an example of automotive. And as the transition is happening to electric vehicles, it needs a realignment of supply chains. Right? Similarly, if you look at the amount of technology that is going into car, and trust me, I think the way millennials buy cars, they don't care about engine. They care about Alexa in the car. Right? So things are changing, and that way you have to also align your supply base to that. Even if I look at your FMCG, I think with the shift to your D2C model, you have to realign your supply chain, how you can fulfill your small orders at a very efficient cost. On the top of that, looking at the regulatory requirement, and it's not just about your, I would say, the statutory requirements like GST, but even I think what we're talking about sustainability, right? I think that everyone is today seeing, because sustainability has a lot of mix of qualitative and quantitative data, that how you can kind of provide those inputs in a structured manner to comply to those standards. And the last piece on the slide is more on the interconnected world, where we talked about during COVID, pharma companies were struggling because of shortage of APIs from China. Now because of maybe, I think, huge debt in the US market, the way inflation is going, it's impacting all of us today, right? So you are not isolated. We are part of the entire interconnected world, and we have to see that, looking at this, maybe what kind of strategies we can put in place. Now, if you look at on this specific slide, I'm sure, so one is inventory, right? It used to be like all of us talking about just in time. But today, I think maybe looking at your volatility and uncertainty, we have kind of started building up your safety stocks. Other things respect to your how well you collaborate with suppliers so that you are the customer of choice in the time of crisis. And I'll take some of those examples as we move forward. Maybe diversifying your supply base, in a different country, in a different location. But all this will come at a cost, right? So if you're moving from a single source to your multiple source, diversifying your supply base in a different country, it will come at a cost, right? So it is always a discussion that how do you trade off, between the cost and your risk of business, right? So, and if you do kind of, even if a 1% chance of any contingency happening, an amount of revenue at risk, and there are a lot of study and business models have been built on that. I think these kind of investments will always outweigh this cost. This is something interesting, and maybe I think happy to share. If you go to a website, you can download this report on from Gartner on supply chain resilience, where what I'm talking about is in terms of how you map your supply chain. So if you look at the very first point, in terms of your at the multi-tier level, see whenever the crisis happened. If you go back and look at your 2008 crisis also, a lot of suppliers started defaulting at your maybe tier 3 or tier 4 level. Right? So in that case, see, I think on an average, each company is operating with, let's say, maybe 2,000 plus suppliers. You cannot kind of do your sub-tier for each and every category. So maybe if you look at your critical categories and work with your strategic suppliers to understand that who are the, let's say, your tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, in which countries they are operating, you get a very good idea around your, the risk. And I'll take an example. See what I'm saying, it may look English, but people are doing that. If I take example of, the 𝗦𝗰𝗹𝗆, which kind of manufactures your outdoor equipment, and you would have heard about a brand called 𝗦𝗰𝗹𝗆, right? So they have done this for 46 of their brands, where they're going up to the tier 4 level to understand the overall risk in the supply chain, right? Similarly, if you look at other thing in terms of targeting your high impact sources of risk exposure, and this is where again looking at your entire supply base. And I think the important thing you can only do once you segment your supply base. Looking at in terms of for those specific categories, what are the different alternates you have in place, right? We're also looking at maybe how much of revenue at risk with respect to this specific supplier. Also, evaluating your suppliers not on your quality, cost, delivery, but I think, and Rahul touched upon that, there is a lot of focus on sustainable sourcing, which can impact your reputation and the brand image. So also factoring those kind of, KPIs also into your overall risk management. Testing for resilience in the business continuity, and this is where kind of working with your suppliers to understand, how much of production flexibility they have to kind of manage your variations into your demand. And in case of a crisis, how fast they can switch from one plant to another. So it's very important to have a category-based resilience, and you can define those scorecards on your different parameters, like your, the strategic importance of category, looking at maybe how much of that supplier participates in the early development of the products, how much of functional and the technical support they are providing, maybe how fast they can change their capacity of as per the fluctuations of your demand. And the last important point is in terms of the partnering with your key suppliers, how you can be a customer of choice. So let me take example of HP here. And everyone has seen the shortages on the chips, and I think they buy a lot of memory chips where the market is highly concentrated. Those people, they kind of made those investments early in the years, so they were able to run their supply chains kind of for much more time compared to their peers in the time of crisis. And then same goes for Toyota also. So Toyota, if you look at for the 1,500 critical parts, they have gone up to your tier 3, tier 4. And on a quarterly basis, they have a very tight line of communication in terms of understanding those risks. And Toyota, which pioneered the concept of just-in-time, they were able to build their inventory and safety stocks by having this constant communication before the crisis happened. Maybe it didn't solve the 100% problem, but it was slightly better compared to their competitors. Right? So saying that, I think before we get into maybe what kind of maybe a technology architecture you can put, and because in order to do this, it's very important to maybe kind of collaborate very well with your suppliers. And these are the benefits in terms of your quality improvements, or let's say cost savings and sustainability. But let's say take a look at maybe in terms of how do we manage this collaboration with your suppliers, right from your product development to your execution. So starting with your the new product development, where you get your bill of materials from your product management team, how fast as procurement you can convert those bill of materials into your sourcing events. Go back to your supply base. I think you talked about how long the zero-based costing and your CBD. Having those kind of your cost-based templates to kind of understand your cost at detail. Also, kind of doing your bill of material roll-up to understand the differences between your targeted cost and forecasted cost. Do those multiple iterations to arrive at your optimal cost. Another thing is in terms of your making your sourcing decisions, and I talked about direct material. So it's not just about your, I would say, maybe not just kind of a best price at the line level or the overall best price at the proposal level. You take into account a lot of other parameters like your performance. You take into account your capacity, your lead time to fulfill. So that's where how fast you can run your different what-if scenarios. So to take into account your overall business continuity and also at the optimal cost. At the same time, we're talking about efficiencies and all that, and we talked about maybe see many companies you kind of run your RFQ process and all that. You run your what if scenarios, then you have your processes. Some companies call note for approval and all that. So how can we digitize the NFA processes for recommendation award, and maybe automatically create POs into your respective ERP system, right? So why again we need to kind of do everything, then again go through the workflows and all that. So digitizing your process on your NFAs and all that, with one click generating your quote comparative summaries, not just for commercials, with your complete landed cost calculations, taking into account all your technical and commercial considerations. When it comes to your contract, and especially for direct material, you have your long-term contracts. So managing those kind of price changes, where you get your price changes because of economy of scales or maybe kind of process improvements on a year-on-year basis. And I'm sure a lot of you people also would be, let's say in your pharma or let's say your chemical industries and all that, would be dealing with commodities, right? So anytime you sign a contract and you have your price variation clauses, maybe anytime the change happens in the commodity, the underlying commodity could be benzene or chlorine or let's say natural gas, how your prices have to be changed, right? So always ensuring that your POs are getting released at the negotiated prices. And the next piece I think is, once you kind of get this piece right, next is more on your overall collaboration. So sharing your midterm to short-term, midterm to long-term focus with suppliers, understanding the supplier capacities and all that. Managing your overall collaboration, not just on the POs, but also your the purchase schedules, to understand your short-term capacity constraints, getting the visibility of your inventory, also trying to do your pre-dispatch inspections and all that. So enabling all that process as part of your supply chain collaboration. And it's also becoming important to give visibility of your inventory to your suppliers also. And I've seen that many companies they're also moving into your VMI models or consigned inventory models to optimize your working capital. So providing the visibility of your min-max levels, your inventory, your demand, so you can also trigger your auto replenishment from the supply base. So once you do all this, I think, and this is what we hear a lot, right, where everyone's talking about your NLP or AI and ML and all that. But the underlying point is, unless you get all these pieces, see if all these pieces you're doing in like 10 different systems, to bring it together to normalize a huge challenge, right? But once you kind of get this piece, then you have all those technologies available as part of your AI ML. and you can build all kind of analytics and drive insights, from the solution. Okay. The next one I'll quickly talk about your the risk management, and I talked about the category-based resilience and doing your supplier segmentation on your different dimensions. And once you do that, so one is, everyone is measuring your supplier performance, which is based on your quality, cost, delivery, and sometimes you also run your product quality programs on APQP and PPAP to qualify suppliers. But at the same time, it's very important to also understand what's happening in the external world. Right? In terms of, there's a lot of information about your suppliers, in the public media, or let's say on the social media tools, or there are a lot of this third parties like your DNB or Moody's, when it gives you information on the financial health of the suppliers. I think Rahul, you talked about SADEX, so similarly there are multiple solutions like 𝗦𝗂𝘀𝗴𝗏 and all that, which typically give you a lot of information on your KPIs linked to your human rights, child labor, and sustainability. Right? So basically clubbing all that information to build up your supplier profile and understanding the risk at a category-based level, where you can look at maybe, in case of a supplier defaulting on, let's say maybe a regulatory risk or let's say financial risk, what are the different options you have in your supply base, maybe what's the performance of those alternates, which countries they're operating. So basically, one can do kind of a quick decision making to find what are the different alternates in case a risk arises in the supply chain. Next, quickly, I'm going to talk about respect to the sustainability. And it's not only important to manage your overall spend, but I think as corporate citizens, it's becoming equally important that how do we reduce our carbon footprint and leave this planet more safer and cleaner for the future generations. This is just to do some context setting, and I think we have been discussing about the corporate social responsibility and ESG for a long time. But I think now governments are getting more serious in terms of driving those standards. And there are commitments at the global levels, which I'm sure flowing down to the corporate level also. But some of the points I wanted to highlight here is, ESG is not more, I would say, just a cost-generating activity. There has been enough research and documentation available now that organizations which are, I think, would say, are setting high bars on ESG have been able to improve their brand image and as well as your increased sales. Similarly, when it comes to your talent retention, today, millennials and Gen Z are looking for organizations, which are kind of socially responsive and looking for your overall inclusive growth. Even with respect to investors also, I'm sure many of you would have read that there are a lot of ESG funds to their market, right? Just to give you a number, close to like $18 trillion of fund in the market get invested into companies who are high onto your ESG initiatives. Right? So so I'm saying it's not just more like, I would say, more of a moral binding, but even I think it's also financially making sense also. So maybe what can procurement do? And so maybe so let's look at your the supplier life cycle. And when it comes to qualifying your suppliers, and you're not just qualifying your suppliers, let's say only on quality, cost, and delivery, but also incorporate maybe your questionnaire and audits in the supplier qualification. There are some certificates, like ISO 24000 something, their compliance to your UNGC, or maybe what are their plans to reduce the carbon footprint, right from the processes for the sourcing of raw material to production and distribution, right? So those are the parameters you start taking into account to understand the sustainability focus, and on that basis you qualify your suppliers. The next thing is enabling a deep collaboration. And let me take an example here. We are working with one of the company in India in agrochemical and specialty chemicals, and and they had signed up for UNGC. So they wanted to kind of start their assessment on the overall supplier sustainability. As of today, they have been able to do it for 50% of global spend, where they standardized their questionnaires on sustainability, which does your auto scoring and classification, and come out with the improvement plans and all that, right? So this is going to go into their overall sustainability report. And then you need some tools in place because you have to do this at scale across your supply base. And other important thing is, there is a lot of information because you cannot do everything in-house, right? So there's a lot of information, with respect to your different KPIs and all that. I talked about 𝗂𝗏𝗧, which gives you, I would say, more than 150 plus data points on your, on ethics, your human rights, your sustainable procurement, and which can be part of your overall supply profile. Similarly, your risk methods, which gives you risk on your macroeconomic risk or geopolitical tensions or any kind of structural changes in the respective markets. So it's very important also to kind of, maybe make that information as part of a supply profile, because it's very difficult to do, kind of send those questionnaires and everything and get this information. And the way it works is that if you kind of onboard yourself on such tools, one is you get the supply base, which is already certified also. Right? You don't have to send your questionnaires and all that, and proactively you can manage the risk. The other important thing is in terms of incorporating the sustainability scores into your sourcing decisions, and then basically, kind of keep on monitoring on an ongoing basis. And this is, again, procurement spend like 70% of time, maybe doing their due diligence and periodic compliance. But when the incident happens, it happens between the due diligence and periodic compliance. So how you can put in tools in place to have your overall proactive risk management. So saying that, I think this is my last slide, and maybe what we do. So we are a technology company, and we work with, I would say, large customers, who are looking to digitize their processes on, let's say, overall supply lifecycle management, right from your supplier onboarding, qualification, managing your supply performance and risk, your e-sourcing, not just for indirect materials, but for your direct materials and for your CapEx also, managing your contracts, both your pre-signature and post-signature, managing your obligations on the contract, your price variations, the catalogs for your direct materials and indirect materials, managing your quota management or your share of business, then invoicing, the API automation piece, and overall analytical insights across your source-to-pay process to help you with better decision making. So only one point, I'm not going to go into details here. We have a booth outside. Happy to discuss with you and maybe also share some kind of case studies and all that we have done for Indian customers on those lines. But the only point I would leave it here, it's a big piece. It needs a huge investment. So we are modular in nature, where we can kind of align with your immediate priorities. And as you grow your digital journey, maybe you can look at your other areas also. Right? So with this, I think I will end my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Okay, do we have any questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rohit from MetLife. So in indirect procurement, how can we put the ESG goals in the supplier performance qualification criteria or on their governance piece?
For your e-sourcing?
Yeah, not for e-sourcing, but for, let's suppose I want to hire a manpower consulting services, right? In those hiring a consultant for that, how can we put the ESG goals? What kind of goals I should put in to select the criteria for a vendor for that, like that?
So see, if you so I think your question is more on maybe your hiring of your manpower and all that, right? So see, one is when you are so there are two parts to this. One is the ESG goal at the organization level, right? Your supply. So let's say today, if you talk about organizations like your Wipro and Capgemini and all that, I'm sure these questions are being asked to them from their global customers also. So maybe what are they doing to reduce their overall carbon footprint in their respective organizations, and with respect to your let's say your power or let's say your renewable energies and all that. So on that basis, because see, you want to be you want your supply base also to be kind of contributing to the positive climate, right? So that's where you can basically kind of include your ESG scores from those respective service providers. The rest thing is in terms of and it depends the kind of services and all that, right? Because if I give you an example, which I'm not sure how much relevant to services, but let's say, you know, all these companies like your AWS or your Google Cloud and all that, they are running like huge data centers, right, which are like mini power plants and all that. And each company has a different way to deliver a technology, right? So we're also understanding in terms of maybe, you know, what kind of technological innovations they are bringing, you know, over a period of time to reduce the carbon emissions and all that.
Thank you.
Hi Harsh, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. My name is 𝗦𝘂𝘀𝗀𝗶𝗶, I work for Kohler, Global Sourcing. So just one question I want to understand, the technology solution which you have shown here, how does it differ predominantly with respect to 𝗬𝗏 or 𝗬𝗏?
Respect to 𝗬𝗏 and?
𝗬𝗏.
So happy to answer that, and you know, I don't want to use this stage to kind of answer that question in detail. But the only thing I would say is, you know, see, when you're talking about this, the overall process on right from your supplier management and the sourcing, contracting, and your P2P, right? What is very important is also a unified data model, right? You need to have your common category masters, you know, common item masters, you know, your, I would say, common supplier masters across the solution. The approach we have taken as an organization, you know, we have grown organically. So if you look at, you know, today, we are the only enterprise player in the market, you know, which provides you a unified solution across these processes, not, I would say, at a cosmetic level, at the UI/UX, but at the database level, right? And that's where we are able to generate a lot of insights, whereas the examples you take about competition, they've taken a different approach, and I think it becomes your disjointed. And the moment you try to kind of scale to other regions, there's a challenge. Second thing is respect to, I would say, you know, our focus. We have taken an industry-specific approach. So we focus on manufacturing, your EPC, financial services, healthcare, and public sector. And then I think for manufacturing, if you look at, you know, we see so many different nuances between like automotive and let's say your chemical or FMCG. So that's where, you know, we provide a lot of capabilities, you know, when it comes to your direct material sourcing, right? What I was talking about, your BOM-based sourcing or, you know, your what-if scenario, different parameters and all that. Similarly, we get into contracting, there are many more examples. And the third thing I would say, which is the key, is flexibility, right? I have not seen, I think procurement is so complex, I have not seen one size fit all organizations. And I think I'm sure all of you would have experienced during implementation where something which is very critical to your business, right? And the vendor will come and say, you know, this is not a best practice. And they try to tell you something else. We are not like that, right? Because see, you have matured your practices over a period of time, which is something critical to industry. We appreciate that. And our solution is flexible, you know, so we can cater to those specific needs. So what we do is, if you ask me, the unique proposition for us is, you know, we provide the agility of the cloud as well as flexibility to kind of adapt to those processes.
Hi Harsh, I'm Sanjay here. Two questions I have. One is related to obligation management, which you mentioned. So this obligation management is more about the EP part, the commercials, or the SLAs, or both. Second, does it integrate with the existing tools like SAP, Oracle, those kind of tools? And how does that integrate? Of course, you can't answer how does that integrate, but does it integrate? And the second question is, so that was the first one. Second question is around ESG, which you were mentioning. And you mentioned 𝗬𝗏𝗏 is also there. So what is your alliance with 𝗬𝗏𝗏? So what do you do there? So two questions, thanks.
So I think, let me take your first question. When you talked about obligations, right? So see, normally, when we look at the contracts, it's not just your, I would say, prices. Especially if you're doing your service contracts or you're doing your CapEx contracts and all that, there are a lot of SLAs also to be managed, right? So maybe how do we kind of manage the performance of those SLAs? And those SLAs could also be linked to some penalties also, right? So typically what happens is, you know, all this information is there on some SharePoint folder and all that. When the invoices are coming, you know, you look at the SLAs, then you do your calculations and all that. So you can digitize those processes around obligations, right? And similarly, I talked about the other obligations with respect to your price revisions and all that, right? Depending upon how the contract has been negotiated. When it comes to your integration, we are ERP agnostic. So we have 70% of our install base uses SAP. So we have done integrations with SAP, ECC, S4HANA, even with Oracle. I think overall we would have integrated with more than 60 plus different applications and all that, because if we understand that you can't exist in silos. No? In order to provide a unified experience to your buyers, it's important not to integrate just with ERPs, but if I take example of one of the customer in consumer appliances, we have done integrations with PLM like your Windchill and all that. Right? So I think we are very kind of technology agnostic, and we can coexist with your existing investments. The other important thing is, I think what you talked about, 𝗂𝘀𝗴𝗏. So what we're doing is we are building our ecosystem. So because 𝗂𝘀𝗴𝗏, if you look at specialize into your providing information on your sustainability or your human rights or child labor and all that. And so we have a kind of a pre-built integration with 𝗂𝘀𝗴𝗏. So we have a partnership, but you still need to have a 𝗂𝘀𝗴𝗏 license for that. Similarly, we have pre-built integrations with your DNB on financial. We have with Moody's. We also have with your risk methods, your GRMS and all that. So this is more like an ecosystem we are building, because as I talked about, there's a lot of information which is there in the external world also, right? Which I think you need to bring in information to take better decisions or understand your supplier profile. And we can't do everything on our own, right? So in those cases, we are looking at some kind of the best-in-class providers, and they are part of our ecosystem.
Thank you for your time. Please stay back for a few seconds. Can I request Nitin Gupta on stage, please, to hand over the memento? Yeah.